Your Honor, with all due respect, that woman has been lying for 20 years. She's still lying now, and you sitting up there in that robe doesn't change the fact that I will walk out of this courtroom today the same way I walked in, free. Those words. I have been on this bench for a long time. I have heard arrogance. I have heard desperation. I have heard grief so deep it shook the walls of this room. But those words, said slowly, clearly, without a single shake in the voice, hit me differently. Because the man who said them was not scared. He was not nervous. He was completely sure of himself. And the woman sitting 10 feet away from him, the one he just called a liar, had waited 20 years to be in this room. My name is Judge Frank Caprio. This is Providence Municipal Court. And what happened inside these walls on this particular morning is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. I looked at this man, Marcus Hale, 44 years old, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. Silver cufflinks, expensive watch, hair perfectly combed. He stood at that defense table like he owned it, like he owned the room, like he had already decided how this day was going to end. And then I looked at her, Delores Tanner, 61 years old, retired school bus driver. She was wearing a light blue cardigan and holding a manila folder on her lap like it was the most precious thing she owned. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, I could tell, from 20 years of waiting. If you believe that justice belongs to everyone, not just the powerful, not just the wealthy, not just the ones who can afford the best lawyers, you are going to want to see every single second of what happens next, because this case was supposed to be closed. It was supposed to be over, and one decision I made changed everything. The bailiff called the case. Case number 2026 CR 00489, State versus Marcus Allen Hale. I straightened my papers. I looked at both sides of the courtroom. I said, "Good morning. Let's begin." Marcus Hale sat down slowly, adjusting his jacket like a man sitting down to a business meeting he had already won. His attorney, a sharp-looking man named Everett Moss, leaned over and whispered something. Hale nodded without looking at him. He was already looking at me. I acknowledged him. "Mr. Hale, you understand why you are here today?" "I do, Your Honor," he said, smooth, polished, the voice of a man who had practiced. "Now let me tell you about Delores Tanner, because without understanding her story, none of what follows will mean what it should. Delores had been driving school buses in Providence for over 30 years. She raised 2 kids on her own after her husband passed away from a heart condition when her children were still young. She never remarried. She worked double shifts when she had to. She saved money in a coffee can under her kitchen sink because she didn't trust banks for the longest time. She was the kind of woman who remembered every child's name on her route, who kept hard candy in her pocket for the little ones who cried on the first day of school. 20 years ago, her younger brother, Raymond Tanner, aged 26 at the time, was killed in a hit-and-run accident on the corner of Mercer and 5th Street in Providence. Raymond was walking home from his second job. He was saving money to go back to school. He was struck by a vehicle moving at high speed and left in the street. He died at the scene before the ambulance arrived. The case went cold. No arrest was ever made. The police had a partial license plate and a witness description, but nothing came of it. The file sat in a drawer for 2 decades. Delores never stopped asking questions. She wrote letters. She called the station. She saved every document, every report, every statement. She kept that manila folder close. And then, 8 months ago, a retired police officer named Gerald Stowe reached out to her. He had worked the original case. He was dying, lung cancer stage 4, and he said he had something to tell her. What he told her brought Marcus Hale to this courtroom. I want to pause here for just one moment, because this is the kind of story that reminds me why I chose this work. If this case is already pulling at something inside you, if you feel that mix of anger and hope rising up, drop a like on this video right now. Join the people who believe that truth doesn't have an expiration date. What I am about to share will shake you to your core. Gerald Stowe, in a recorded statement made 3 weeks before he died, said this. He had been approached by a man in the weeks following Raymond Tanner's death. That man had offered him money to make certain evidence disappear, a witness statement, a photograph taken by a traffic camera at Mercer and Fifth, and a partial print lifted from a broken taillight found at the scene. That man was Marcus Hale, 24 years old at the time, already from a wealthy family, already untouchable, or so he thought. Stowe took the money, he buried the evidence, he carried that guilt for 20 years until his body finally told him it was time to let it go. When this recorded statement came to light, the original case was reopened, evidence was re-examined. The partial print, which Stowe had never fully destroyed, he had hidden it, not shredded it, in a moment of weakness that would later become Delores Tanner's salvation, was still intact. It matched Marcus Hale. I looked at those fingerprint results sitting in front of me. I looked at the photograph, taken from a traffic camera 20 years ago, recovered from a server backup that nobody knew existed. It showed the front end of a vehicle. The partial plate matched Hale's family car registered at the time. Exhibit A, the fingerprint match report. Exhibit B, the restored traffic camera photograph. Exhibit C, Gerald Stowe's recorded dying statement, played in full. That last exhibit, that recording, I want you to understand what it meant in this courtroom. When the audio played, Stowe's voice came through the speakers rough and slow. He was clearly weak, but every word was clear. He said, "I took the money. Marcus Hale gave it to me. I destroyed what I could. I am sorry. I am so sorry, Delores. I am so sorry, Raymond." The courtroom went completely still. Delores Tanner pressed both hands flat on the folder in her lap. She closed her eyes. Tears moved down both cheeks. She did not make a sound. Marcus Hale looked at his attorney, just for a second, just a flicker, and then the mask came back. His attorney stood up. "Your Honor, my client disputes the integrity of this so-called evidence. A deathbed recording from a disgraced former officer carries no legal weight. The fingerprint analysis is based on a degraded sample. The photograph is barely readable. This entire proceeding is a miscarriage of—" "Sit down, counselor," I said, calmly, clearly. Moss hesitated. "Sit down." He sat. Hale leaned back in his chair, and then he said it, quietly, like he was talking to himself, but loud enough for the first two rows to hear clearly. "This city still does whatever old money tells it to do. You think a dead cop's last words in a smudged photo are going to touch me? I have had 3 governors at my dinner table. My family built half the infrastructure in this state. This case was closed 20 years ago, and the only reason it's open now is because someone needs a story for the evening news." He almost smiled. "Raymond Tanner was nobody. I'm sorry he's dead, but that is not my problem." 10 seconds. I counted them. Nobody in that gallery moved. Nobody spoke. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff stood very still. Delores Tanner opened her eyes, and I felt something I have not felt in a very long time on this bench. Not anger, not surprise. Something colder and more certain than either of those things. I looked at Marcus Hale for a long moment, and then I began. "Mr. Hale, I want you to listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say all of this once." He met my eyes, still not afraid. "You just said that Raymond Tanner was nobody. I want to talk about that word. Nobody. Because in my courtroom that word does not exist. Raymond Tanner was a 26-year-old man walking home from work. He was a son. He was a brother. He was the kind of young man who worked 2 jobs and still found the energy to dream about a better future. He bled on a cold street corner while his killer drove away. And his sister has spent 20 years, Mr. Hale, fighting to make sure that somebody, somewhere, acknowledged that his life mattered." I paused. "You said Raymond was nobody, but you drove away from him like he was nothing. You paid money to make sure no one ever looked at your name. You bought silence, and you have been sleeping just fine ever since, haven't you?" Hale said nothing. "You mentioned governors at your dinner table. You mentioned your family's name on buildings. You think those things protect you in here. Mr. Hale, let me be very clear with you. In this room, the only names that matter are the names on these documents. Raymond Tanner, Delores Tanner, Gerald Stowe. Those are the names that built this case, not yours. I leaned forward. You called this woman a liar this morning. You looked right at her and said she has been lying for 20 years. But the record shows that it was you, Mr. Hale, who lied. You lied by disappearing. You lied by paying for silence. You have been living a lie for 2 decades while this woman grieved alone. Do not use the word liar in my courtroom again. I could hear someone crying softly in the gallery. I did not look away from Hale. You asked me what a dying man's last words are worth. I'll tell you exactly what they're worth, Mr. Hale. They are worth this moment, right here, right now, in front of every person in this room. Wait. Before I read this sentence, I need you to do something. Share this video, right now. Find one person, a friend, a family member, anyone, who needs to hear that justice, even when it is 20 years late, is still justice. Send it to them, and then come back, because the sentencing I'm about to hand down is unlike anything this courtroom has seen. Marcus Allen Hale, this court finds sufficient evidence to refer the matter of obstruction of justice and the original vehicular homicide to the state attorney's office for full criminal prosecution. That process will begin today, but what I can address in this courtroom right now, I will address fully. I laid out the sentencing carefully. First, a civil restitution fine of $250,000, payable directly into a memorial scholarship fund to be established in Raymond Tanner's name at Providence Community College, the school Raymond had been saving to attend when he died. The fund would be administered by Delores Tanner and 2 board-appointed trustees. The first scholarships would be awarded within 18 months. Second, Marcus Hale's driver's license was to be suspended for 5 years, effective immediately. He would surrender his license to the bailiff before leaving this building today. Third, community service. This is where I took my time, because I wanted it to mean something. Not picking up trash on the highway, not checking in at an office. Marcus Hale was ordered to serve 300 hours at a Providence Grief Counseling Center that specifically serves families of unsolved crime victims. He would sit in those sessions, he would listen to those families, he would not speak unless invited to do so by a licensed counselor. He would be supervised and his attendance recorded by the center director, who would report to this court every 30 days. He would also write a personal handwritten letter of apology to Delores Tanner, not typed, not drafted by a lawyer, handwritten in his own words, reviewed by this court before delivery. If I deemed the letter insufficient or insincere, he would rewrite it until it was neither. And finally, because of the statement he made in open court today, the statement calling Raymond Tanner nobody, Marcus Hale was required to speak at 3 Providence public high schools within the next 12 months. The topic, the consequences of cowardice and the meaning of accountability. The speeches would be written under supervision and approved by this court. He would stand in front of rooms full of young people, and he would say Raymond's name. When I finished, Hale sat very still. His attorney started to speak. I raised one hand. He stopped. The bailiff will take Mr. Hale's license now. He will also be remanded briefly for a contempt review based on the statement made earlier today. 30 minutes in the holding area while I review the transcript, then he will be released to comply with today's orders. The bailiff moved to Hale's table. Hale stood slowly. He handed over his license. He was walked to the side door. He did not look at Delores on his way out, but she watched him go. She watched every single step. I called a short recess. When I came back out, Delores Tanner was still seated. I stepped down from the bench, something I do not do often. I walked to where she was sitting. She looked up at me. I said, "Your brother's name will not be forgotten in this courtroom." She nodded. She pressed her lips together. And then she said, very quietly, "He loved butterscotch candy. Did you know that? He always had some in his pocket, just like me." She smiled, just barely. We were alike like that. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would have been better than silence in that moment. 6 months later, I received a report from the Grief Counseling Center. Marcus Hale had completed 112 of his 300 hours. The director's note said he had been quiet at first, guarded, But somewhere around the eighth session, something shifted. He started listening differently. He stopped sitting with his arms crossed. He began to stay a few minutes after each session ended, sometimes talking to the facilitator. The note said, "He cried during a session last Tuesday. He did not try to hide it. I do not know if that means Marcus Hale changed. I do not know what lives in a man's chest after 20 years of carrying something like that. I am not in the business of telling you whether someone deserves forgiveness. That is not my decision to make. That belongs to Delores Tanner alone. What I do know is this. Raymond Tanner walked home from work on an ordinary night. He was not famous. He was not powerful. He did not have a seat at anyone's dinner table. He had butterscotch candy in his pocket and a dream in his head. And the world moved on without him for 20 years like he had never existed. But he did exist, and in the end, this courtroom said so. I sat alone at my bench after the last person left that day. The gallery was empty. The lights were still on. I looked at the empty chairs, and I thought about how many people come through these doors carrying something too heavy to put down alone. And I thought about how the most important thing this bench can do, the most important thing, is to make sure that when they finally get here, after however many years it took, they feel the full weight of this room working for them. Justice is not always fast, but it should always be honest. And no one, not wealth, not status, not 20 years of silence, gets to decide that another person's life was worth nothing. No one, not in my courtroom, not ever.